My name is Bernice Lee. I'm a distinguished fellow at Chatham House and also senior advisor at Nature Finance as well. Today we have this session, the next 40 minutes, going through some of the real-life examples of companies of how do we stay sane and resilient in the context that we find ourselves in. We know about tariffs. We also now have war. We have supply chain disruptions in a real sense and real time now. So with that, let me invite all the speakers to join me, please, up here. We have Thomas Becker, who's the Senior Vice President, Government Affairs, Sustainability for BMW Group. We have Jamal Shamarik, who's Senior Vice President, Global Supply Chain with the Estée Lauder Companies. We have Abe Eshkenazi, who's Chief Executive of Association of Supply Chain Management, ASCM, and Marion Peterson, who's Executive Chairman of De Beers Consolidated Mines. Now, today we're going to listen to all of them in terms of what their challenges are. And we will hear that there are some real-life cases that we're going to hear about in terms of how each of these companies, a different part of the global value chain, is trying to deal with this. So I think what we will do is we'll start on, probably in some ways, on the consumer ends to start with BMW and then Estée Lauder, and then we have the supply chain management, yes, and then we will eventually back to more upstream in terms of the sources of some of the materials as well. So you will hear the different perspectives today. So if you may kick us off, Thomas, in terms of how BMW sees this and what are the things you're doing in terms of battling this resilience, these challenges in the current geopolitics.
Well, I mean, a car maker is a systems integrator. So we don't make the entire car. We put together competencies that we buy from our partners in the industry, which is a global one and which is uniquely interconnected. So if you take an X5 car that drives around on the streets of London, it comes from Spartanburg, South Carolina, has an engine from Austria, has steel from the United States, and some pieces from more or less every place in the world that you can think of. And by contrast to some political talk, there is no such thing like independence or sovereignty or total resilience. It's about managing dependence. And this is what we have to do. There are different approaches you can take. You can obviously look that you avoid a total unilaterally dependency in the supply chain. You can diversify in some fields. You can prepare for the need to change. But all of that comes with a price. So there is no free lunch in terms of resilience either. So it's managing trade-offs. And on the other hand, there are approaches which, under many dimensions, are a good idea, and that is why it is a core piece of our strategy, that is circularity. So we have been showing already 5 years ago in Glasgow a car that is essentially made without any virgin materials. So with our new vehicles that hit the road now, with about a third of that being made from something that has been something else, at least you can reduce the dependency on some of the global raw material flows to some extent. And this is why we see this as, if you like, the multi-tool of sustainability, because circularity reduces CO2, it reduces exposure to risks coming from human rights, biodiversity, etc. And they also mitigate a bit the exposure to political risk. So that means we have to always to keep calibrating how much resilience we get at what kind of a price sticker, and then manage properly.
But I suppose the benefit of this approach of circularity is that you understand the material chain, because it keeps within the loop, so to speak.
Indeed.
And indeed, you're rightly pointing out that if there are many things we don't agree with in the world, what we do agree is we all try to reduce import dependencies, at least on one source. Now, I mean, that's so very, very exciting to hear about the circularity piece that you're embracing and the closed loop that you're talking about. We can come back to a little bit about this when we hear from De Beers later as well, down the line on some of the questions of the challenges and the trade-offs as well. But perhaps next as well now, I mean, on my list I've got to stay louder at the moment, in terms of understanding a bit more. I mean, I'm a long-term user of their cosmetics, so I'm a little bit of a fangirl here. And my parents have a BMW, by the way. Just
here we are. So
don't worry. And who doesn't love diamonds? Don't worry. So with that, please come on.
I love it. So Bernice, as you said, I mean, it's a lot of companies is running about 30 plus brands. One of them is one of your favorite, White Linen. And we are managing 17,000 SKUs. So for us, the complexity comes from the sheer number of combinations, because in each of our formulas we're talking about 30, 40, 50 kind of ingredients. So volatility, as we have seen in the last couple of years, if not now 2 decades, has been a challenge. But the way we approached it, we're looking at it as this is something now that is structural, not anymore episodic. And the only way for us to manage that, talking about the dependency, Thomas, is in reality to build the resilience into our operating model through the entire value chain, from the sourcing by having very stringent operating models with our suppliers, very stringent code of conduct, that look at child labor, sustainability, et cetera, and then all the way down to our facilities, where we built and we made a huge amount of investments in the last hundreds of millions of dollars in just the last 5 to 6 years, to create the ability to juggle and move and switch. But at the same time, from a distribution point of view, we started in 2010. We started with more regionalization, because in our industry, the components, the ingredients, the materials, we can find them more or less at 99% in all the regions. So our motto was minimum 75% of the products that we sell to our consumers in any given region will be produced in that region, and the materials that go into those products will be sourced in that region. And today, for example, for EMEA, we are at that 75% threshold. So that's one of the things. And then, I can talk also about the dependence in terms of, I would say, equipment, maintenance, leveraging AI, and maybe that's a topic I would love to get to at some point in time. But leveraging AI will also create more momentum around the agility that we need to build in our operating model to respond to the changes that are driven by our consumers' landscape. I mean, in the last 10 years, 15 years, we've seen e-commerce taking a lot of the brick and mortar, and by doing that, the consumers is asking for products tomorrow, if not the next hour. So you need to build a supply chain that is super, super agile and super, super dynamic.
So this shortening of the demand chain, that when I see something on the fashion, catwalk, I want to hit my shop early enough. Indeed, it's also bringing you're saying, to the more localized and regionalized production chain. So we have two solutions in some ways. Obviously, you mentioned circularity, and now we have regionalization and local production, moving closer to markets, closer to sources, I suppose, as well. But I suppose your business is a bit different from Thomas's, in the sense that it's a bit harder for you to move next to all the mines, just to be close, but certainly to markets. But Abe, I mean, supply chain, your business. You also do a lot of interesting research as well, in terms of this gap between the say and do, all the research around obviously sustainability and also employers. So the whole kind of social dimension that we're beginning to hear as I move towards you. Can you tell us more about your thinking and work as well?
Historically, resilience for supply chain was either inventory buffers or redundancy in your operations. That no longer is acceptable. That's no longer sufficient. The pandemic changed those rules. One of the things that we as a supply chain industry fell short of during the pandemic was three critical areas. First was visibility. We had little visibility beyond tier 1 into our supply chains, where most of the disruption occurred was in tier 2, 3, and 4, well beyond your well-financed larger organizations. The second is transparency. We did not know what was in our supply chains. There isn't a supply chain officer that can walk into the C-suite right now and say, I don't know who or what is in my supply chain. And that is off the table. So theoretically, you should know all activities. That's the good news. The bad news is that you now know who and what is in your supply chain. And you're not as resilient, you're not as sustainable, you're not as ethical, and now you need to adjust accordingly. The last is traceability, and we're a little bit further away from traceability, complete traceability of all the materials right now. Those organizations right now, they're treating resiliency as an operating model as opposed to a response to a change. So resiliency right now with scenario planning and AI and the technology solutions right now are, you need to marry that with the talent side that understands, critically evaluate the issues that the individuals are talking about right now. Technology is much more powerful than we're using right now, and the individuals that are using it may not be as prepared to use the technology. So from our vantage point, it's that, the resiliency is a talent, as much as it is a technology solution for organizations. And yet we're in a period of flux where we built systems for speed and cost, not for sustainability. And now you need to embed that within your organization. But yet, as our gentleman was saying, in a time of crisis, speed and cost are going to rule the day, not sustainability.
Interesting. I mean, I think this skills and talent question comes up a lot in terms of how it feeds into the broader question of resiliency. And perhaps it's a good time to go to Marion, because a 136-year-old business that you are talking about there, obviously there is some understanding around resiliency and obviously but resilience, and then also in terms of materials management as well.
When you're 138 years old, you have developed perspectives. That volatility is part of life. The cycles of life find its way to work through it. And over the 130 years, we've learned some very important lessons. And one of the lessons that we've learned is the value of partnerships. Partnerships, not only for today, but partnerships through thick and thin. We have acquired the ability to act not in a responsive way, but in a restrained way. Endurance is not built on a opportunistic response to what it presents today. Endurance is built on restraint when you know you have a higher purpose and you find your deep inner resolve, or no matter what goes wrong, you have planned for all eventualities. I remember sitting in 2008, we've gone through world wars, we've gone through global economic crisis, we've gone through changes of governments and leaders. We have absorbed most of the shocks. And let me say that in 2008, I was sitting in a board meeting when we were discussing the global financial crisis. And we were able to say, what happened last time when there was such a crisis? And we went to our own records of World War II. And that's the power of history. When you are able, without any of the consulting firms, you can go to your own records. But we have also learned is humility. I think there's a touch of humility can go a long way in resolving some of the very critical things. But your partnership must be value-based. Your partners must know whatever goes wrong, you are there. Good times, bad times. And let's remember, diamonds are formed under huge pressure. It's pressure that produces diamonds. Therefore, the beers are also shaped by pressure. But we are refined by adversities. We are not weakened by adversity. And that's why when we look at life, we as the beers has an inherent belief that diamonds are forever. Big moments, celebrations. And that's why we, as the current custodians of the future of the beers, must rise to the challenge. We must be able to absorb the kind of pressure of a volatile world and face the future with confidence, because the beers knows diamonds.
Well, thank you for that. I think you're quite right that indeed diamonds can absorb a lot of geological changes. But at the same time, right now, we are talking about geopolitical as much as geological. The time frame is a bit different. But more importantly, perhaps, I mean, I think some of you hinted at that really in terms of whether this is episodic, whether it's here to stay, and whether or not that means something a bit different in terms of the strategy to deal with it. I mean, a couple of things came to mind. All of you talk about resilience. Of course, resilience, what the trade-off of resilience, is it efficiency? I mean, have we had it with efficiency now? It's been running all our lives for so long. Is it now time for us to revisit what is important? Can I get your views on this?
I would, that's a very good question. I would look at it from this perspective. There is old efficiency and new efficiency. So old efficiency, and I'm going back to probably a decade, 2 decades, particularly in the consumer goods, area, where we'd be looking at, low-cost countries to get the best price possible, use the lowest supply chain to get that product in the hands of a consumer, to have it to that consumer, sell it to that consumer at the right price. So let's say the most optimized price. I should say maybe lowest price, right? But then what happened in the last 10, 15 years, there were trade agreements challenges, there were tariffs challenges, there were disruptions, there were geopolitical things. And then you started adding costs. On top of that, your low-cost countries' costs, labor costs, started going up and up and up and up. And over time, you realize that, hey, maybe there is a different model. And there is a model that will probably have an optimized cost versus a lowest cost that has built-in resilience because, as I said earlier, geopolitical challenges and volatility, they're here to stay. It's structural. It's not anymore episodic. And then there is the consumer expectations. I need it tomorrow versus I can wait for it. So when you put all that together, for me, that becomes the new efficiency model, and hence I would say the work we have been doing since 2010 around continue, crack down on regionalization, develop partnerships with, regional players. In our industry, we're fortunate enough to be able actually to have them pretty much in all the regions we operate. That would be my lens and perspective.
Brilliant. Thomas? Baron, you want to come into it?
I think one of the critical elements around supply chain management is the awareness that we are all in business. All of us need to be efficient. But I think when we approach it from a partnership basis, then it is the optimum cost, not lowest cost at all cost. Mm-hmm. I think the concept of lowest cost is actually very costly, because sometimes when we have the muscle, we drive our suppliers over a period of time out of business, because we want to have the lowest cost. If we have a partnership, then we realize we are both in the same business. We acquire our heavy-duty vehicles, which is really being assembled by the original equipment manufacturer. So what we have realized, if we optimize our supply chain and work with our supplier partners in a cooperative way rather than adversarial. And there must be a recognition. My supplier partners must, like me, remain in business. And that's why margins are part of life. There's no point in having a partnership if the one partner gains at the expense of his partner. So fundamental to the way we do business as the BS is the partnership model, sustainability, and optimum margins around our supply chain partners.
It's very interesting. So you said the lowest cost model is very costly, so the externalities have to be accepted as a part of the challenge, which is very important. And also the whole idea that the new kind of efficiency means a more resilient kind of efficiency. I mean, we're dancing around the question of cost a little bit. I wonder, I mean, Thomas and Abe, do you want to come into that a little bit?
I mean, if we would find a cheaper way of making cars by being less complex and less dependent, we would do it anyway. So there is a relation between complexity and efficiency and cost. We produce in the US, in China, in Europe, in Mexico, in the United Kingdom for a variety of reasons. But everywhere you have a mix of origins. You will not ship steel from China to Germany to make a car. You will buy steel in Europe for European production. Same for the US, same for China. But if I read stuff in media about a car maker saying, and now we have a China-free supply chain, I mean, this is just nonsense. There is no China-free car. There is no Germany-free car. There is no US-free car. It's as simple as that. And show me one who will bring that about anytime soon. Nobody can make chips alone. Not the Taiwanese, not the Chinese, not the Americans, not the Germans, not the Dutch or whoever. Sooner or later, you will need somebody. And I think the more one escalates these kinds of conflicts, the more the cost will become visible. And also look at the history of the boiled up discussion about rare earths last year, when China restricted exports. It didn't take long for the US to de-escalate. So nobody, I think, really wants the end game. The question is, what is the realistic scenario in between? What is maybe a certain rebalancing of localization and global supply chains? But this is not going to be a black and white total U-turn 1 or 0 thing. Very clearly not in our industry.
I think that's very, very interesting that you, in some ways, call the elephant in the room, which is that, you know, we can talk about independence, but is a pipe dream, is unrealistic, not within reach. So really, the real question is, how do you manage dependencies? I'm quite fond of saying that I live in Swiss Cottage in London. We can't even build a pub down my road without protest. So the whole idea that we could bring productions back en masse is obviously not something that could happen tomorrow, if not longer term.
I come from the lower Rhine region in Germany, where you have these big open pit mines for lignite coal, 15 kilometers long, 600 meters deep. You will not do anything like that in Europe ever again. Full stop. So if there is a continent who depends on import of raw materials and whose only option of mitigation is circularity by keeping stuff in, it is Europe. The US and China have ample options, at least, of sourcing at home. And let's be clear, they used the last 2 decades to open up markets, to secure access to raw materials in other countries, and they have the means to get it if they need it. Europe was passive in trade for 20 years. Now we started again after some interruption with Mercosur, with India, with Australia, which is long overdue. And this is what we need more of. We need more collaboration more signals that free trade still is a good idea and that we seek collaboration with other countries.
Brilliant. So that builds very nicely on the theme that also Baron mentioned, which is on partnership as well. Abe, do you want to comment on this as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation relative to the globalized world that we built over the last 30 years. There is no country that is self-sufficient. No country has everything that it needs. Every country needs something from somebody else. And so to the point about regionalization, it depends on what region that you're in, depending on what you consider in your national interest and your national security. And so we have in the US, we have proclaimed that silicon chips and EV batteries are in our national interest and security. You go to Egypt and it's going to be food. So in every country, you have a different need in terms of what they consider as critical to their population and to their sustainability or their economic viability. The commitment and the investment that we're talking about here in terms of the prime, in terms of their extended supply chains, to bring them together and to bring them along is critical right now, because the small and medium-sized organizations don't have the resources that your prime or your tier one suppliers do. So there's going to be an investment required, and it already is being made by organizations, specifically in technology. They're integrating all of their partners to ensure that they're getting timely, relevant information. At the same time, they're opening up cybersecurity and ransomware risks in their third and fourth tier partners, because security protocols aren't the same. They don't have the resources that the primes do. So while we're trying to ensure that we get all this information so that we can make timely, relevant decisions on the various scenarios, we're exposing our organizations to much more risk than we ever have. And lastly, the one area issue that we never seem to discuss is the consumer. The consumer still is price sensitive, and their price is their three determinants. It is not price sustainability or resiliency right now. Organizations respond by making what consumers buy. As consumers want sustainable, reliable, ethical products, companies will make sustainable, ethical, reliable products. If they don't care and it's only price, the companies are going to make those products. At some point, we need to bring the consumer into the conversation about responding to the consumer demand signal right now, and the consumer demand signal right now is price sensitivity.
Thank you. I mean, I've been thinking quite a lot about the idea that within the context of the current geopolitical strife / flip-flop sometimes, in some ways, many businesses like yours are bearing the cost of the flip-flops by investing in, duplicating supply chains and, et cetera, et cetera. Prices are inevitably going to come up, therefore, and we as consumers inevitably will at some point notice. I mean, we're all going to begin to notice. I mean, I'm interested in not just your views, but also the room's view on this as well, but perhaps more in the form of questions, if I can bring some question in terms of what we've heard so far. I mean, what we've heard so far are obviously cautiously suggesting that one can manage one's way in some ways through circularity, through partnerships, through regionalization, through, obviously understanding more the social resilience point in some ways, to sort of the employee talent part. But I'm just sort of curious to hear from the room as well in terms of what the question you have in terms of these examples that we hear from companies who are obviously trying to make sure that you are staying not just resilient but sane, which is a different category really, isn't it? So I wonder whether or not we can see if there are anyone who want to sort of ask questions. I've got a question at the front here. And when the microphone comes to you, please do introduce yourself. Please try and keep the questions short. If you would like to direct it, please do. And we can open one more room-wide discussion as well.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Tanya Larson, and I own QuestionZero.com, that actually consumer-focused sustainability benchmarking platform. And it derived from the whole bunch of vouchers and coupons websites.
Did you introduce yourself?
Yeah, Tanya Larson, QuestionZero, yeah. So our business derived from us running e-commerce for quite a lot of years, focusing on the vouchers and coupons and that kind of stuff. And then we started to introduce sustainability into shopping. So the question is, did you measure the reaction of your shoppers, like price sensitivity, in comparison to their response on your sustainability efforts, how you discuss it to them? Do you have any data that measures the choices between price and, I guess, sustainability positioning?
Yeah. Are we happy to pay for sustainability?
Are consumers willing to pay for sustainability? Is that?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
Yeah, I think the question is really...
The
you have
audio
any-
is not great.
Yes. Anyway, so
Yeah, yeah.
do you have a number? Did you try to measure the response on the consumer shopping, right? Or purely price, or price and your sustainability market?
It's a very complex model. We have that on the map to look at, but we have not yet cracked the code on it. We can do it in isolation, if you will, but it's quite complex because e-commerce for us is our brand.com directly to the consumers, but it's also through some of our partners. So it's something that is our map. It's part of the journey.
I would say it depends on the industry. Not surprisingly, consumer products switching costs are fairly small for organizations and for the consumer. They may see it as a commodity, whereas if you're talking about diamonds, that's not a commodity. That is a unique item that, it's one of a kind. And so relative to what the consumer is willing to pay, are they willing to pay more for consumer products? And what we're seeing is no, that is not the case right now. We'd like to think that individuals are much more concerned about the long-term implications of the products they buy.
Yeah.
But we've not made it very easy for any consumer to understand anything about supply chain. And I don't care what product it is. Pick up a pen, a coffee mug, or your computer. Try to trace where it's sourced from, who made it, who touched it, how long did it take to get to you, how did it get to you, and what happens to it after you're done with it. Try to answer that about any product. And what you're going to find is extraordinarily difficult. You have your Patagonias who have open source and clearly identify where they source from, and they take back their product and they recycle it. Those organizations they're out there, but they're unicorns right now. That is not ruling the day right now. But the consumer is willing to pay a price premium for that product. Now, are they willing to do so for the BMWs? Absolutely, because that is a specific brand, similar with the product. But again, when you start to get into consumer goods, where most of the purchases are made, price is still the primary determinant.
Totally.
Yeah, so I'm going to open up more questions. I'm going to ask someone from the floor to speak clearer because it's very hard to hear from here. So if there is another question here from anyone on the floor? No, there is one over there, the lady and then a gentleman next to her. So let's take both of them.
Hi, my name is Rhiannon and I'm from WWF. I take your point. There's a lot of research out there that says that the consumer wants to basically buy the cheapest product. But when you walk into any supermarket, you're incentivized to buy in bulk, to buy 2 for 3, or 3 for 2. It's really difficult for a consumer who is environmentally conscious, of whom there are lots of the silent majority out there. But when it comes to point of sale, what effort are brands doing to make it easier and more clear to the consumer what they're buying? Because that, I think, will be a game changer when people actually do that in a more consistent manner. I can go into any supermarket. Which butter do I buy? Which chocolate do I buy? Like, it's so complex on an individual product level. You end up trusting the brands. That then means it's less of a commodity and more of a kind of considered change. But I think the more people that keep saying that the customer won't buy sustainability, that reinforces the prejudice that then businesses take away, where it's very, very difficult. So I was just wondering what you as brands are doing to help the consumer make those better choices.
Thanks for the WWF for the question about what are you doing to create the right choice architecture for us. I understand that's the term people supermarkets use, is to create the choice architecture, the choice environment, so that we are more incentivized. Let's take one more question and then I'll come back to please.
Hello. Yeah. Thanks to the panel. Josh Brown, I work for Engie. My question follows on from the others, and it's about whether we're asking the right question. Are consumers willing to pay more? And rather the question is, does embedding sustainability into, let's say, premium or not basic products increase brand equity and loyalty? That's the question. The reason I get there is because my wife is far less concerned with climate change than I am. but she frequently comments after buying a premium option that she's pleased to find out that that brand has taken steps. And it does encourage her to, it creates a sense of warmth and loyalty. So are we asking the right question? And is the one I posed more suitable to your companies?
Yeah, that's how I justify shopping personally, just to be clear. So with that, we have now about 3.5 minutes left for the panel.
Oh.
So this is what I'm only following orders. So what I would like to ask all of you is to take the last two questions in mind as you wrap up as well in terms of what you want to sort of share with us at the end.
Yeah.
Obviously the question about are we asking the right question, but also can corporates and others do more in terms of creating the right incentive structure, choice environment for consumers as well. Maybe we'll go from the other side. Maybe Baron, we'll start with you. De Beers?
I think we must accept that volatility is here to stay. We must, however, remain committed to long-term sustainability in our world through mutually beneficial partnerships, not opportunistic relationships, but embed deeply held values into partnerships so that you can withstand shocks as it happens. There are those who want to make things happen. There are those who ask what happened. And then there are those who make it happen.
In partnership with consumers too, probably for some of the right outcomes, I think.
And that would be your supply chain professional who makes things happen. It's an unusual environment that we're in right now because the systems that we built for speed and cost are under significant stress right now. So the transformation of supply chain into a much more sustainable and a much more resilient and agile function for organizations is under a tremendous amount of stress because in times of crisis, it often is cost that rules the day, and that's the finance function for the organization. But yet in our research and one of the studies that we did with Gartner is that what we found is when it's mandated and it's embedded in your KPIs and in your employee, expectations and their metrics, we're finding out employee retention is much higher, profitability is much higher, but yet it takes the commitment from the top of the organization down to the commitment to every employee in the organization. And what we found also is when it's mandated through the supply chain, it's much more effective because it's within the business model as opposed to outside of the business model. Something happening to it is happening within that organization. So the focus for us is to ensure that there is a clear mandate for sustainability that is cascaded throughout the organization so that there's clear role and responsibilities for the talent to understand what their participation is and how they can contribute to the organization. But yet it's extremely difficult to have that conversation when your house is on fire and somebody's telling you you ought to rebuild your house much more sustainably. We're trying to put out fires today while we're trying to rebuild our houses at the same time.
Jamal?
Yeah, for me, sustainability is a journey. So it must be embedded in your operating model. And yes, investments in sustainability, they come at a cost. But if you put them in your operating model, I'm going to give you an example at a still other companies, what we call the manufacturing paradox. Manufacturing paradox is, the agenda is how can we use less water? How can we consume less energy? How can we do things, faster? But what it did, thinking through that lens, it actually pushes us to reduce our cycle batch times. In other words, our production cycles went from, some of them from hours into minutes. It also helped us actually reuse more water, et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of the day, when we do the math, our ROI is positive. Sustainability was an investment, but at the end, it did not increase the cost.
So you have to deliver all of the above, basically, ultimately.
Correct.
Thomas, you have the last word and the last maybe 10 seconds.
Well, if we invest in, for example, more circular materials, there are a breadth of motivations, and I totally agree with what was said. This is not a one-dimensional thing. People who buy a premium product, meaning paying more than you would just pay for a function, means that people have an expectation in the integrity of what the company is doing and what the brand stands for. whereof sustainability is one dimension, but not the only one. It is like quality. It is like such a strange phenomenon like sportiness, which is also extremely hard to measure in terms of what are people actually ready to pay more for it. You have totally different customer views. If you have a Dutch corporate customer who is has an ambitious climate policy and therefore wants to drive a green fleet, they start asking what is the footprint of the car in its supply chain. And this is why we deliver data on our supply chain footprint now since 4 years and share these informations on a digital basis. If you have somebody who is skeptical about electric mobility, he will ask, when do I get break even with a petrol car? And then they want to see a number like 17,500 kilometers in the case of our new BMW iX3. So it is no one single criterion. Only one thing is for sure, that you're not going to get 3 BMWs for a price of 2.
Well, I mean, I think perhaps because we have a very young person, a baby in the room, which is why a panel about geopolitics and resilience ended up on sustainability, which I like to think is because of the presence of Next Generation that reminded us of that importance. Now, with that, I would like to ask all of you to help me thank the speakers. And I would also like to invite the next chair, John Ferguson, the Global Head of Trade and Geopolitics, the Future of Trade Initiative from the Economist Impact, to moderate the next session as well. Thank you.